Sony have sent us a new lens to try out for about 24 hours, and it's actually an update to an old favourite. It's the 70-200 f2.8 G Master lens. Now, that's an interesting kind of update because the original lens actually came out in 2016. I've got that here. And that's quite a long time ago in terms of, especially in terms of mirrorless cameras and kind of the capabilities and what's been going on. In 2016, a lot of us were shooting on DSLRs, whereas a lot of us have moved over to mirrorless now. And obviously, if you're watching this video, you're probably invested in the Sony ecosystem. So it makes sense that it's been upgraded or brought into a Mark II version because there's a lot that's happened, especially with things like autofocus, you know, size, glass, all the stuff. There's a lot of technology that has kind of advanced, and it makes sense that Sony would want to actually update what is a pretty essential lens in the G Master range, because obviously this is part of the kind of trinity of zoom lenses, the 16-35, 24-70, and then obviously 70-200. And 70-200 f2.8 is a pretty important pro lens in kind of a photographer's bag. So let's talk about the updates. Obviously it's a G Master lens, so you know image quality is going to be outstanding. That's just how it works, right? G Master lenses look great, and that is certainly the case here. There are some upgrades to the image quality, which we're going to talk about, but the two biggest things here with this lens, first of all, the weight. Now, in terms of size, they look pretty similar, right? Not a huge amount of difference. But the weight is really, really noticeable. This is almost 30% lighter than the Mark I, but you can really feel it. I've got it at the front of the A9 II here, which is also a pretty light body, to be honest. But this is, I mean, just picking up the Mark I now and then holding the Mark II with the A9 II feels lighter. I mean, that's ridiculous. This is so light that going around handheld, there's no issues at all for me at all. Which I love, because 70-200 is one of my favorite lenses to shoot with because you can get so many different kind of things. Landscape, portrait, you know, street photography. I actually love shooting with this, which might sound ridiculous because of, you know, the size of this lens. But I actually love being slightly further away and getting those kind of candid shots, zoomed and stuff like that. I love that kind of feel. I hate being up in people's faces for street photography, so I love using a zoom lens like this, and 70-200 f2.8 gives you some really nice looking street photos as well. But you can do video with this. There's a huge amount you can do, and actually, speaking of video, we're going to talk about that as well with this lens. But for now, let's talk about image quality first of all, because that's obviously a big deal. Let's talk about some of the advancements that have been made with that as well. So with the Mark II, we've now got an XA lens in here, which controls aberrations. We've actually got a few things in here to control aberrations, ghosting, flaring, which is great. We've got two super ED glass elements, which help suppress chromatic aberrations. And then we've got the nano AR coating, but it's kind of a Mark II version of that, and that helps with flaring and ghosting. Now I tested that out in the middle of the night, because like I say, 24 hours, I'm gonna make the most of it. In the middle of the night, doing kind of car photography, seeing how the flaring and the ghosting would work with the headlights. And I've got to say, pretty decent actually, especially shooting pretty much straight on to those headlights. I'm really impressed with how that has come out. Overall, the image quality is just superb. You know, there's really no other way to describe it. The sharpness, edge to edge, no issues with stuff like distortion or vignetting. It just looks great, which, to be honest, no surprise, right? It's a G Master lens. It's exactly what you'd think would be the case. Now, there's an 11-bladed aperture in here as well, which means you're getting very smooth, very nice round bokeh, which is fantastic for things like portraits or whatever you want to shoot with that nice blurred background, because of course f2.8 allows you to get a nice blurred background, and you can use that compression as well to even just blur that out even more. So portraits, oh, absolutely. And we've got a 40cm minimum focus distance as well, which actually means you can get in pretty close to your subject. Now let's talk about that autofocus, because obviously, like I say, a lot has happened since 2016. A lot of advancements, especially with Sony, who really they nail the autofocus, you know, eye autofocus, tracking, whatever it might be. The Mark I came out in a time when things were very different for autofocus, and I think while it's not slow and it's not unpleasant or anything like that to use, it's noticeable going to the Mark II. Now this is about 4 times faster in terms of autofocusing. It's got 4 XD linear motors, which means it's very quick, very smooth, and very, very quiet focusing, which is great obviously for stills, especially if you're doing events where you need to be really quiet. but also for movies as well. That's going to be great for shooting video because you're not going to have to worry about focusing sound being picked up by the microphone. It's a floating focus system, so we've got 2 independently controllable focus groups, and obviously it's all internal focusing. And like I say, 4 times faster than the Mark 1, but also 30% better at tracking that focus while zooming. So if you're shooting sports or wildlife or something like that, that's going to be super handy to be able to zoom in, still be taking those shots. That's great. Now, obviously the Mark 1 was image stabilized, and the Mark II absolutely is as well, but there's an improvement here as well. There's a new mode, mode 3, which is specifically for actually emphasizing the stabilization of the frame while shooting video, which is great because the 70-200 has so much to offer for video actually. It's one of my favorite lenses for shooting that kind of cinematic B-roll kind of style for video because you can get some great compression, some lovely bokeh. I love a slightly tighter shot like that anyway, and be able to shoot handheld like that with the image stabilization actually focusing on stabilizing the frame for video, great news. That means you can really kind of shoot handheld without worrying about kind of shake. Obviously you still have to put the effort in, but that's a great thing to be able to do. It being lighter as well really helps with kind of the longevity of being able to kind of move around, shooting handheld like that without having to pop on a tripod to, give your arms a rest or something like that. Speaking of video, we've also got reduced focus breathing, we've got reduced focus shift while zooming, reduced axis shift while zooming, and in general, it just feels good. It just feels nice to shoot with for video as well as still. Now let's talk about the design and the build of this lens. Obviously it's quite a lot lighter, like I've mentioned, but it really is noteworthy how light it is. It's really obvious when you pick it up out of the box. But it looks very similar to the Mark 1. Size-wise, it's the same, I think. I think it's probably exactly the same. But they do look very similar until you start looking a little bit closer. This has actually got an aperture ring on it, which I didn't expect. So that means we've got aperture ring, zoom ring, and then manual focus ring. And that's a really nice addition, a kind of really nice quality of life addition to the lens. Obviously you can set it to A, there's a lock here as well, so you can do that if you want to control it from the camera. But it's a nice thing to be able to quickly adjust on the lens itself, a nice tactile feel. And there's a clicker and a declicker as well. Obviously you've got the zoom ring, which feels good, the manual focus ring, which is weighted quite nicely, and then you've got your custom buttons for things like focus hold, and you can adjust them to do different things. There's 3 of them on here, which I think is really nice because there's a lot you might want to do with this lens, and that's a really handy thing to have available to you. Something else worth noting, it works really well with the teleconverters as well. So the 2 times, which I've been using a lot, and the 1.4 times, and that really extends out the reach of this lens. 2 times converter is going to make this a 140 to 400 millimeter. It does bring that aperture to f5.6. That's fine, I think, especially with ISO capabilities. I think that's absolutely fine. But being able to work really well with these teleconverters is a big deal for a lens like this because it really just extends that versatility, gives you a lot of options. I shot quite a lot with a 2 times converter, and that's a lot of fun to be able to take this to a 140 to 400. That's a good time. 2016 was quite a long time ago for this lens to come out. A lot has changed since then. And since it's such an important lens within the G Master lineup, I think Sony have done a good job of actually bringing this up to date, with the AF being much, much faster. It's much lighter, which I don't think I expected, but I absolutely love that it's so much more hand-holdable. Stuff like the aperture ring on there, the image stabilization, kind of adjustments, the new mode. There's a lot actually here to make it a worthwhile upgrade from the Mark 1, especially if you use autofocus a lot. If you're shooting sports, wildlife, something like that, the upgrade in the autofocus here is going to be noticeable, definitely. I noticed it immediately when I was shooting with this. It is a lot faster. It's much more what you'd expect from a 2021 lens versus maybe a 2016 lens, which is, it's fair enough. It totally makes sense that actually it's much, much faster now, but it's worth keeping in mind. It just makes it a worthwhile upgrade, and it makes this probably more in line of what you'd expect in 2021 for a G Master lens. Let me know down in the comments what you think of the lens. I'd love to hear your opinion on this. Of course, there's a link to check out the actual full spec of the lens down in the description. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. I will of course see you in the next video, and as always, thanks for watching.